Okay. So I think we're now live. This is my first attempt really at doing a proper live stream. So hello, welcome to Arcana Unearthed number 2. We are today going to be looking at the Arcane spells list in the new Player's Handbook revised rules, the new Unearthed Arcana, which came out a couple of weeks ago now. We did do another live stream in which we were looking at the weapon mastery system. That was with me and Isaac. If you are familiar with Bardic Quest, he is our dwarven cleric in our actual play series, which is the main series for our channel. But it's just me today. I couldn't quite manage to get hold of anybody else at this time of day because it is an unusual time of day to be doing a live stream here in the UK. But I am free, so I'm going to. And also, I've been meaning to do another one for a couple of weeks, and just schedules haven't allowed. So I wanted to play catch up a little bit. As I said, last week we looked at some of the new gear and we looked at some of the weapon mastery system. And this particular stream, to give it some limited scope, we're going to be looking at the new Arcane spell list. So, a few things to cover. First of all, if you're not familiar with the Unearthed Arcana, which is the playtest material for the next iteration of D&D, which was previously being referred to as 1 D&D, but now they seem to be referring to it as just the next iteration of 5th edition, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So this is the playtest material where you can kind of see where they're going with it and is part of their feedback program, which you can do through D&D Beyond at dndbeyond.com, and you can download this Unearthed Arcana. If you go to the top left-hand corner of the screen where it says sources, drop down and then you'll see a 1 D&D playtest, although that may have changed, but basically the playtest bit, and you'll be able to download the Unearthed Arcana from there if you want to read along. So, as I say, the focus for this stream is going to be on arcane spells and the arcane spells list. So one thing that they have done with this iteration of 5th edition, which they've somewhat borrowed, I think, from their days of designing 4th edition, is this idea of power source, the source of a spell. Which the main sources are, which they note in this Unearthed Arcana, are arcane power, divine power, and primal power. These are kind of the sources of magic in the D&D multiverse. Now, what's interesting and good news, they have already mentioned in the sources of some of the spells, I think this is good news, is that they are really trying to specify some unique spells for unique classes, in the sense of you might have spells that are only available to the sorcerer, or spells that are only available to the wizard, or spells that are only available to the warlock, etc. This is a slight move away from where they were with 4th edition, not 4th edition, my goodness, the current version of 5th edition, where there was a lot of crossover. And of course, there will still be some crossover, but they are leaning towards that idea of more unique spells list, which is great news. So the first thing that we're going to cover with this live stream is, and we're going to kind of skim over it really because it is huge. They provide a large list of all of the, well, not all of the arcane spells, but most of the arcane spells that they're looking at for the new revised version of the 5th edition arcane spell list. They have mentioned, and there is a note in this, that part of this list, or rather 2 bard spells, have been removed from the list, which are Vicious Mockery and Dissonant Whispers. They have mentioned that they don't want anybody to panic, that these spells will be back in a future Unearthed Arcana, but that suggests to me that they are looking at making some additional changes to Vicious Mockery and Dissonant Whispers as part of this playtest and development that they are doing. So do not fear, Vicious Mockery and Dissonant Whispers will be back in a future Unearthed Arcana, but is not featured in this one. So I just want to quickly skim over some small details of this updated spell list, this updated arcane spell list, because as I say, it's quite big, but there are some minor changes that I just want to compare. I have my 2014 Player's Handbook here in front of me, and I just wanted to compare some of these small notes that they've made. Some of the spells are changing schools. They're changing some of these spells just to maybe balance out the schools a little bit. So they've made a note and put a little asterisk next to some of these spells. So just want to quickly go through them just to compare the schools that they were in versus the schools that they're moving to now. So the first one that comes up with an asterisk that I can see is Dancing Lights, which has been moved to Illusion from the Evocation school, which actually I think makes a bit more sense, to be perfectly honest, because Evocation, you usually think about like damage spells, like your elemental spells, like fire, lightning, all that sort of stuff. So actually, I don't think that it's a bad move, the fact that that it has moved over to Illusory, because I think that's probably more appropriate for what I think they're going for. So that's good news. Then the next one, we go through a fair bit until we get to Thunderwave. Now, this is interesting. Hi, Jason, in the feed. Nice to see you. Yes, Thunderwave. Now, this is interesting. Let me just flip over through to the Player's Handbook, because they've moved Thunderwave. Now, based off what I've just said, in fact, you would think that Thunderwave would be Evocation, because that makes sense. But according to this new one, am I going to make myself look very stupid now and it not be Evocation? No, it is Evocation in the 2014 Player's Handbook. But they're changing it to Transmutation. And I'm not entirely sure that makes sense. Maybe they're just trying to balance some things out, but that doesn't quite make sense to me. But okay, that's what they've gone for. So then we move to level 2 spells. And the first one to have been changed is Blindness and Deafness, which has been moved over to also Transmutation, which has been changed from Necromancy. I mean, I'm not sure either of those are the right fit. I suppose Transmutation makes more sense than Necromancy, because Blindness and Deafness isn't necessarily something that you think about with death. Although I suppose you could argue that perhaps there's an argument for like decay and affliction there with Blindness and Deafness. That would make sense. Yeah, actually, the more I think about it, Transmutation does kind of make sense. I think I probably would have gone for Illusory, though. Probably myself personally, but to each their own. Okay, so then we're still in second level spells, but we're looking at Flaming Sphere. I'll try and flick through this as quick as I can, because actually I'm not sure this is the most entertaining aspect of a live stream. Just flicking through these spells, but there we are. This is my first proper live stream, certainly the first one I've ever done on my own, so I'm new to this, so please do forgive me. So what are we looking at? Flaming Sphere. Flaming Sphere was Conjurations, now moved to Evocation. Again, makes sense. Conjuring a Flaming Sphere makes sense, but also, again, when you think of Evocation, you think of those elemental spells and such. So that makes sense. Shatter is next as we come to near the end of the second level spells. Shatter. Probably would have been easier to have these up on screen rather than in the book. So Shatter was Evocation, now Transmutation. I mean, again, I can see Shatter is not necessarily, it's loud noise has been conjured, I suppose. So it's not necessarily elemental in nature. I wonder if I would have gone for, again, illusory. Although I suppose it's not an illusion, it's actually manifesting and adjusting and changing the nature of things around it. So I guess that also makes sense. That it wouldn't be illusory. So transmutation, I guess. Shatter's a strange one. I don't think it necessarily fits in either of the any of the schools particularly well, but there we are. Then we have sending, I believe, as we move into level 3 spells now, which is nice because it's close to Shatter in the book. So was evocation, now divination, sending a short message. Maybe I just like the illusionary school of magic, but to me, I think illusory makes more sense, perhaps, than either evocation and divination. Divination, I think of as looking into the future and trying to predict how things might go and how things might move. But sure, divination is what they're looking at now, which is fair enough. We stick with S, but we do move into level 4 spells with Stone Skin, which has been moved to transmutation, which I think naturally makes sense, from abjuration. Abjuration is a strange one. I always struggle with the meaning of abjuration. Let me see what the book says. Abjuration, at least in the 2014 Player's Handbook, is spells that are protective in nature. That's the one. Okay, I mean, yes, that makes sense, but I think transmutation makes more sense. Mechanically, yes, it is protective in nature, but I think in terms of flavor, it's certainly more transmutation than it is abjuration. Then we move on to contingency, which is level 6. Now, as we get into these more higher level spells, this is where, as I'm sure most people is the case, I get less familiar with these spells. So I'm not even sure what contingency does. I don't think level 6 spells don't feature frequently in my campaigns. So let's have a quick look at contingency as it sits currently in the world of D&D. Contingency. Choose a spell of 5th level or lower that you can cast that has a casting time of 1 action and can target you. You cast that spell, called the contingent spell, as part of casting contingency, expending spell slots for both, but the contingency spell doesn't come into effect. Instead, it takes effect when certain circumstances occur. You describe that circumstance when you cast the 2 spells. For example, a contingency cast with water breathing might stipulate that water breathing comes into effect when you're engulfed in water or similar liquid. The contingent spell takes effect immediately after the circumstance is met for the first time, whether or not you want it to, and then contingency ends. So it's like readying an action, but for a spell. Okay, cool. That is put as evocation in the 2014 Player's Handbook. But they're going for abjuration in the new spell list, which, again, I suppose makes sense. You could argue for divination, I guess, perhaps, maybe. Although I suppose you're not using magic to predict the future. You're just hoping that you guess it correctly, I guess. All right. So then we move to level 8 spell, and we're looking at glibness. I mean, yeah, level 8 spells I'm definitely not familiar with. So glibness. This is as written in the Player's Handbook from 2014. Glibness. Nice and short one. It is transmutation in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but it's been moved to enchantment in the current iteration, or the Unearthed Arcana. Glibness. Until the spell ends, you make a charisma check. When you make a charisma check, you can replace the number you roll with 15. Additionally, no matter what you say, magic that would determine if you're telling the truth indicates that you are being truthful. Okay, fine. So basically, tricky to Well, rather, it makes it quite easy for you to deceive and indeed talk your way. It's kind of like a charm offensive spell in many ways. That's been moved to enchantment. Yeah, I think that makes more sense than transmutation, because glibness doesn't imply a physical transformation. So enchantment makes more sense. And then finally, of these tweaked spells, in terms of schools, we're looking at telepathy. And then once we've done this one, we get into the really juicy bit of this Unearthed Arcana, which is some new or tweaked spells. So telepathy. Now, obviously, I think that's fairly straightforward in terms of what it does. It's telepathic communication, but obviously more powerful than, say, something like message or whatever. So that's a 8th level evocation in the 2014 Player's Handbook, but it's actually being moved to divination. I mean, sure. Again, I'm not sure if divination is the right fit thematically, because it's not predicting the future. Again, maybe I would have gone for the School of Illusion there. Or indeed, I suppose evocation does kind of make sense in a way from before. Yeah. Again, it's one of those ones that doesn't necessarily fit a good school. So I guess they're trying to play around with some of these and see what they can make fit really, really nicely. Anyway, so next we're going to move into the real juice of some of this, which is the spell descriptions for some new spells. Now, there are some notations here. There are, as I say, new spells. 11 new spells appear in this particular list that they've provided. I think that some of these are adjusted ones as well. Yeah, I can see Eldritch Blast in here. So some of these are tweaked spells. Some of them are brand new spells. So there are 11 new spells in this overall list, each one connected to a sorcerer, warlock, or wizard feature. So this is interesting, and this is new. So these are spells that are specifically designed with one class in mind, and particularly designed to take advantage of some of those abilities that some of these new classes have. Now, admittedly, we haven't gone so far in this deconstructing of this 50+ page, precisely 50 page Unearthed Arcana. So we haven't seen what the new classes can do specifically yet, but this might give us some idea as to how these things or how these new classes might be working. Also, Chaos Bolt, which has moved over from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, has been included in this list. So that's going to be moving over to the Player's Handbook in the new version, which is pretty cool. And also, all sorcerers will be getting it as a bonus spell, which is also pretty cool. Particularly given that it has a range of 120 feet, which is pretty handy for a first level spell as a bonus spell. Also, Eldritch Blast. Obviously, we're all familiar with Eldritch Blast if we've encountered a warlock. This cantrip now scales only with your warlock level, and all warlocks get it as a bonus spell. So that's interesting. Warlocks are a favorite to use as part of multi-classing because they create some interesting options. But they're really trying to I don't want to say railroad, but they're really trying to encourage you to stick with the warlock class as its own class, rather than necessarily using it just to soup up whatever class you've chosen. So I think that's not a bad thing, because yeah, I've always felt a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that the warlock is like the black sheep of the classes, in that nobody really wants to be a warlock on its own. They just dip into warlock every now and then, or at least that's a lot of the discourse that I see online these days. So not a bad move, I don't think, even if it does nerf things a little bit. Now, admittedly, granted, I am a forever DM, so a lot of my opinions on these things are going to be coming from a place of being a dungeon master rather than necessarily coming from the perspective of being a player, which is why I like to get some of the other cast members of Bardic Quest in on these live streams if I can, because then of course you're in the position where you're getting a little bit more of a balanced view, perhaps, because in reality that is a bit of a nerf to the Eldritch Blast in reality. So I don't know how well that's going to sit with players, but for me as a dungeon master, I think that's a good move. Also, Hex has been tweaked, which can now deal extra damage only once per turn, and all warlocks will be getting that as a bonus spell as well. We'll come back to those spells soon, but let's get into the real exciting stuff now. So we're looking now at new spells, I believe. Arcane Eruption, which I think is a new spell. It doesn't seem to be specifically highlighting any new spells, and there are a ton of spells now across so many different books. So forgive me if I get some of these wrong, but I can't think of Arcane Eruption as a spell. So at the moment, I'm thinking, yeah, it's brand new. So Arcane Eruption, 4th level evocation spell, specifically for the sorcerer. This is an casting time action, a range of 120 feet with verbal and somatic components, and the duration is instantaneous, as is so often the case with evocation spells. So, churning magical energy explodes in a 20-foot radius sphere centered on a point you choose within range. When you cast the spell, you select the type of damage dealt by the explosion: acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, psychic, or thunder. So basically, it is an elemental explosion, essentially, of some sort of kind. Each creature in the sphere must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 6d6 damage of the chosen type. On a successful save, they take half as much damage. And that's a 4th level evocation spell, so I mean, not terrible on the damage front. Choose one of those d6s. Oh, this is interesting. Choose one of those d6s. The number rolled on that die determines a condition that's applied to each creature that failed the save, as shown below. A creature has the condition until the end of your next turn. So not only does it 6d6 damage, but it also comes with a condition as well. So the conditions are: 1, it's incapacitated; 2 is blinded; 3 is frightened; 4 is poisoned; 5 is charmed; and 6 is deafened. Oh, that's pretty cool. I don't know specifically why the mechanics are that you have to choose one of the d6s that you roll. Oh, I see. Oh, so you basically pick a number from that pool. So if, for example, you rolled your 66s and you just rolled all ones, like wah, wah, the only choice would be to incapacitate your opponent. But if you rolled a good spread of, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe no sixes, no sixes would mean you couldn't choose deafened, but you could choose one of the others. That's pretty cool. I like that. That's pretty cool. So at higher levels, when you cast this spell using a spell slot of 5th level or higher, the damage increases by 1d6 for each slot level above 4th. Now, what's interesting about that I also like is it also means that if you're casting it at higher levels, not only is your damage increasing, but also the likelihood of a good spread across all 6 conditions, which is pretty cool. Obviously, you only get to pick one that affects everybody, but again, that spread, the bigger you can make that spread, the more likely you're going to be able to pick something and be able to more tactically use it. That is a really cool spell, and I really, really like that. And there's something about it that kind of feels wild magic to me, which I really like, kind of leaning into that lore. That's pretty cool. I like that spell, which again, I think is a new spell. So next we're moving into a cantrip. As we move into B. So this is a warlock cantrip. This is called Book of Shadows, and it's a conjuration cantrip. Now, it does take 1 hour to cast. You cast it upon yourself. It requires verbal and somatic components, and it is instantaneous. Now, this sounds pretty cool just by the name of it, Book of Shadows. But stitching together strands of shadow, you conjure forth a book in your hand. The book contains eldritch magic that only you can access, granting you the following benefits. Cantrips and rituals. When the book appears, choose 2 cantrips and choose 2 first-level spells that have the ritual tag. The spells can be from the arcane, divine, and primal spell lists, and must be spells you don't already have prepared. While the book is on your person, you have the chosen spells prepared. You can use the book, as a spell casting focus. The book disappears if you cast this spell again or you die. Cantrip upgrade. When you reach 5th level as a warlock, this spell also enhances your cantrips while the book is on your person. You can add your warlock spellcasting ability modifier to the damage rolls of any cantrip you cast that doesn't already have that modifier added to its damage roll. This is pretty cool. I like this. So this is basically free spells that you get to prepare. Now it'll be interesting when I see the new warlock class and how that's changed. But as it stands currently, I mean, this sounds pretty strong and pretty powerful for something that is a cantrip. Particularly given that you're basically now going to have access to, I mean, actually the spells do have to have the ritual tag, which limits the pool, I suppose, of spells. But there's spells across Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell lists. So that's pretty damn cool in that basically it's opening up these various different spell pools, these spell lists to you as a warlock. And basically you get to keep the book until, well, either you cast the spell again or you die, but you can cast the spell as a cantrip, even though it takes 1 hour. So this is not something you can do mid-battle. You are going to have to prepare. This is like a short rest kind of spell that you might use, but that's pretty cool. You can change up some of those spells midway through the day. Kind of like that. Okay. So now Chaos Bolt. Now this is the one that's moved from Xanathar's Guide to everything. And all sorcerers get it as a bonus spell. Now I don't know if this is changed because I'm not too familiar with Chaos Bolt. One moment. So just grabbing Xanathar's Guide to Everything so that I've got it on hand. So Chaos Bolt, 1st level evocation spell, Sorcerer. So this is Sorcerer specific. Again, all sorcerers are getting it as a bonus spell. Casting time, action range, 120 feet. Components, verbal or somatic, and it's cast instantaneously. You hurl an undulating mass of chaotic energy at one creature in range. Make a ranged spell attack against the target. On a hit, the target takes 2d8 plus 1d6 damage. Choose one of the d8s. The number rolled on that die determines the attack's damage type. This sounds a bit familiar, right? Same as before, you're kind of getting a pool of options depending on how many dice you roll. And so again, if you only roll ones, you only get to choose from the acid damage type. But if you roll a spread of all, I mean, you're not going to, but all 8, then acid, cold, fire, force, lightning, poison, psychic, or thunder are at your disposal. Pretty cool. If you roll the same number on both d8s, oh, this is new. If you roll the same number on both d8s, because you're rolling 2d8, the chaotic energy leaps from the target to a different creature of your choice within 30 feet of it. Make a new attack roll against the new target and make a new damage roll, which could cause the chaotic energy to leap again. Now that is bloody cool. That is cool. I must admit, I was not familiar with Chaos Bolt prior to this, but wow, that is really cool. A creature can be targeted only once by each casting of this spell. So if the chaotic energy jumps around, then you can't send it back and forth and back and forth. So they only get to be targeted once. At higher levels, when you cast this spell, you can spell slot 2nd level or higher. Each target takes 1d6 extra damage of the type rolled for each slot level above 1st. So you are going to be, this is a little bit more restrained than Arcane Eruption, which makes sense because Chaos Bolt is 1st level, Arcane Eruption is 4th. With Chaos Bolt, you're only ever going to be rolling 2d8. There's no way of upgrading that to a higher level. But I just want to check up on Chaos Bolt in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, because as I say, I must confess, it's not come up in one of my campaigns that I run before, so I'm not too familiar with it. So Chaos Bolt, it looks to be the same, actually. I can't see anything jumping out. It all looks to be the same. So the only thing with Chaos Bolt is that it is moving over to Player's Handbook for the new iteration, potentially, if the playtest goes well. So now, there we get into the real nitty-gritty here. So this spell is very exciting for a number of reasons. This is a 5th level spell, and this is called Create Spell. It is a 5th level transmutation spell for wizards. This has got me really, really excited because the thing about wizards that is kind of part of the flavor and has been since the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons is the fantasy of the wizard in the tower creating their own magical spells, creating their own power, and that's where things like Tasha's Hideous Laughter come from, right? It's the idea that these wizards, these powerful wizards, have created these spells. So it's very cool that there is a spell being created in order to create a spell, so that you can kind of live that wizard fantasy a little bit. So this is a reaction in response to yourself casting Modify Spell, which is also a new spell included in this playtest, which we will get to in a little bit. You have to cast Modify Spell first before you can cast Create Spell. Again, 5th level transmutation spell. Cast it on yourself. Components are verbal, somatic, and material. The material cost being an arcane focus, which the spell consumes. Interesting. Worth at least 1,000 gold pieces per level of the spell altered by Modify Spell. So this is basically going to destroy your arcane focus, which could potentially be like a spell book or something. Although spell book worth at least 1,000 gold pieces, maybe, who knows? But it's going to destroy an arcane focus, and it's going to cost you a lot, 1,000 gold pieces per level of the spell altered. So I mean, a 6th level spell is going to be 6,000 gold pieces, which is quite expensive. So, synthesizing your arcane knowledge and power, you strive to create a new spell. To succeed, you must concentrate for 1 hour and meditate on the spell you just altered with Modify Spell. Otherwise, this spell fails. Wow. So you don't want to be doing this in combat. Not that you'd be modifying spells in combat, but anyway. If you succeed, you must start casting Scribe Spell, which is another new spell that will come up in the list later, within the next 10 minutes and add the altered spell to your spellbook. Once the spell is in your spellbook, it becomes one of your known spells. It gains the wizard source tag rather than the arcane tag, and it gains a name of your choice. That is bloody cool. I mean, living the wizard's dream right there. I love the fact that they have made a design choice now to make the creation of spells part of the wizard class built in. Well, not built in, you have to choose the right spells, but if that is a fantasy that you want to explore within your 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, then you absolutely can. I gotta say, the weapon mastery system I'm a big fan of. Go watch Arcana Unearthed #1 that we did a few weeks ago. That I was a huge fan of, but absolutely this creates spell as well. So far, so good on this playtest material. This is probably the one I've been most impressed with since they started doing these playtests. So big fan. So Eldritch Blast now. So I don't know if this is going to have much change actually, because I think they covered it in the design notes at the beginning. But Eldritch Blast, evocation, cantrip, warlock, casting time, action, range 120 feet, components verbal and somatic, duration instantaneous. A beam of crackling energy streaks towards a creature within range. Make a ranged spell attack against the target. On hit, the target takes 1d10 force damage. Cantrip upgrade. The spell creates more than 1 beam when you reach higher warlock levels, specifically warlock levels. 2 beams at 5th level, 3 beams at 11th level, and 4 beams at 17th level. You can direct the beams at the same target or at different ones. Make a separate attack roll for each beam. Now, that does feel a little bit different. I'm having a bit of a moment here. Oh no, it is force damage. God, why am I having such a moment? I was thinking force damage. That doesn't sound right, but no. Eldritch Blast is force damage. Forgive me. So yeah, in which case, then nothing really seems to have changed other than the fact that it only scales now with your warlock level, as was highlighted earlier. So with that in mind, we'll move swiftly on to Hex. This is a first level enchantment spell specifically for the warlock. Casting time a bonus action, range 90 feet, components are verbal and somatic, and requires concentration for up to an hour. You place a curse on a creature that you can see within range. Until the spell ends, you can deal an extra 1d6 necrotic damage to the target when you hit it with an attack roll. You can deal this extra damage only once per turn. Also, choose one of the six abilities whenever you cast the spell. The target has disadvantage on ability checks made with the chosen ability. If the target drops to 0 hit points before this spell ends, you can use a bonus action on a subsequent turn of yours to curse a new creature. A remove spell cast on the target ends this spell early. At higher levels, when you cast this spell using a spell slot of 3rd or 4th level, you can maintain your concentration on the spell for up to 8 hours, and the extra damage increases to 2d6. When you use a spell slot of 5th level or higher, you can maintain your concentration on the spell for up to 24 hours, and the extra damage increases to 3d6. Now, this all sounds pretty familiar to me, the only difference being, as far as I can tell, the extra damage, or the extra damage rather, only being dealt once per turn. So I'm not going to look that up again because I'm pretty sure that sounds about right to me, but I am happy to be corrected. So now we get back to some of the exciting stuff with the wizard. Now, this is one that didn't come up during the create spell. This is memorize spell. This is a 3rd level divination spell, ritual casted for the wizard. Or rather, it's got the ritual tag, not ritual casted. Ritual tag for the wizard. Casting time 1 minute. Range self. Components verbal, somatic, and the material component of your spell book is required. It's instantaneous in duration. You choose one spell from your spell book that you don't have prepared, and you choose another spell that you do have prepared. The unprepared spell replaces the prepared spell on your list of prepared spells. This replacement lasts until you cast Memorize Spell again or finish a long rest. So that's kind of cool. So the idea being that you are essentially swapping out your prepared spells midday, not at midday, but during your adventuring day. That's pretty cool. That's a nice touch, actually. And I like the fact that it is locked into a spell. So it's a 3rd level spell. Obviously, you can ritual cast it. Yeah, I like that is a spell built in a way, to kind of hack the wizard's powers. I like that. At higher levels, when you cast this spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, you can replace an additional prepared spell with an unprepared spell for each slot level above 3rd. Pretty cool. It feels as though the stuff that they're using with this spell is really quite tapping into the lore behind wizards, which I really am enjoying. So only a few more spells to go, and then we'll probably wrap up this live stream. I say a few more: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spells. So we're sticking with the wizard here with Modify Spell. This is a 4th level transmutation spell, also a ritual for the wizard. Casting time 1 minute. Range self. Components verbal, somatic, and material. Your spellbook will be required. Duration is instantaneous. So, using arcane formulas in your spellbook, you magically alter one arcane spell you have prepared. You can change the spell's color, sound, and smell, and make one of the following modifications to the spell. Components. Remove one of the spell's components, verbal, somatic, or material. You can't remove the material component of a spell that consumes that component. Concentration. If the spell requires concentration, damage can't break your concentration on the spell. Damage type. If the spell has a damage type, replace it with one of the following types: acid, cold, fire, lightning, necrotic, poison, or thunder. If the spell has multiple damage types, you can change only one of them. Range. If the spell has a range of at least 5 feet and doesn't have a range of self, increase its range by a number of feet equal to 30 times your wizard spell. A ritual. If the spell lacks the ritual tag and has a casting time of at least 10 minutes, give it the ritual tag. And targets. If the spell affects one or more creatures and doesn't have a range of self, it now affects only your allies or enemies. Choose which when you cast Modify Spell. The chosen alteration lasts until you cast Modify Spell again, or you finish a long rest. This altered version of the spell can't be added to a spellbook or spell scroll without first casting Create Spell. At higher levels, when you cast this spell, you get a spell slot of 5th level or higher. You can choose an additional spell modification for each slot level above 4th. This is really cool too. So now we're really starting to see how these create spells happen. Now, it would be interesting, I think, actually, and I can't see any reason why this wouldn't be the case, but you could really start to every day, let's say you modify a spell, then you cast Create Spell, so it's written into your spell book, or rather Scribe Spell, which we'll come to. Then it gets written into your spell book. Then you could then, I suppose, modify that spell the next day and create a new spell from that, scribe it into your spell book. So every day you get the chance to iterate on these spells, so that in reality you could make some really powerful spells. I can't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case. Alter one arcane spell you have prepared. Now, would it still have the arcane tag? Create spell. No, it gains the wizard source tag rather than the arcane tag. So that's actually quite important, because what it's saying is that actually you can't stack them, because it wouldn't have the arcane tag, and it specifically says that it needs to be an arcane spell that you have prepared. So that's a shame, because that would have been really cool, but also ridiculously OP, because if you let's say you're doing 4th level spell, so let's say, I'm trying to think of when 4th level spells come in, but let's say for argument's sake you're a 6th level wizard. 30 times 6, 10 times 6 is 120 feet, so you can move a spell to 120 feet. Oh no, you wouldn't. You could increase its range, so you could then create a 240 foot spell the next day and just keep increasing the range every day, which, if you're out in the wilderness and moving through days like they've gone out of fashion, that could become very OP very quick. So I can understand why that's not the case, but very cool. So you can change you can remove components, remove the requirement of or rather damage, breaking, or concentration, change damage type, increase range, create a ritual, or change the targets of a spell. That's pretty cool. So Pact Familiar, Conjuration, Cantrip, Warlock. Casting time 1 hour, range 10 feet, components verbal and somatic, duration instantaneous. You summon an unearthly entity to serve you. It manifests in an unoccupied space of your choice within range. This creature uses the Pact Familiar stat block, which we'll come to in a minute. If you already have a familiar from this spell, that familiar transforms into the new one, but retains its memories. You don't get a second Pact Familiar. Whenever you cast the spell, choose the familiar's creature type: aberration, flumph or knot of tentacles, a celestial, owl, raven, or other bird, dragon, pseudo-dragon, or similar dragonet, fey, pixie or sprite, fiend, imp or quasit, or undead, shadow or skull. This choice, I like the shadow. That's pretty cool. This choice affects the familiar's default appearance, as noted in the parentheses, and it determines certain traits in its stat block. You can alter details of the creature's appearance each time you summon it. Pretty cool. Combat. The familiar is an ally to you and your companions, and it obeys you. In combat, it shares your initiative count, which is good, because I believe familiars in the current version of 5th edition don't, and that's a nightmare to run, particularly given that familiars don't usually attack anywhere, or can't attack. So I'm glad that they've changed that. In combat, it shares your initiative count, but it takes its turn immediately after yours. On its turn, the familiar takes the dodge action and uses its move to avoid danger, unless you use your reaction to command it to attack instead. Okay, so basically, assume dodge, and it will move unless you say otherwise, which makes sense. I like the fact that they've kind of programmed in its default behavior, because that makes it easy to manage. So the disappearance of the familiar. The familiar disappears if it drops to 0 hit points, if you dismiss it as a bonus action, or if you die. When it disappears, it leaves behind anything it was wearing or carrying. If you cast this spell again, you decide whether you summon the familiar that disappeared or a different one. Fairly standard. I don't think that's really a change, probably just a rewording. But I think that works pretty much as familiars function normally, so that's fine. Remote viewing as a magic action, which is a new type of action. If you are new to this playtest material, as a magic action, you can see what your familiar sees and hear what it hears until the end of your next turn. Now, I'm finding it interesting, and I don't think I've seen anybody saying this. I just want to talk about the magic action a little bit. I'm finding it interesting that things like this are coming up, because this is not a combat mechanic. This is an exploration mechanic. And I'm finding it interesting that, as somebody who kind of likes the old school way of running dungeons, which is not explicitly stated in 5th edition, of things happening on turns and rounds as you're moving around a dungeon, I find it interesting that they're using the terminology of at the end or until the end of your next turn for exploration mechanics. I'll just leave that with you. Because I am finding that very interesting that has come up a few times when I've been looking at some of the playtest material. Anyway, so cantrip upgrade. Starting when you reach 5th level as a warlock, you can communicate telepathically with your familiar as long as you two are on the same plane of existence. Additionally, while perceiving through your familiar's senses, you can also speak through your familiar in your own voice. Now, this is interesting because this has been changed, because at least compared to a normal wizard's familiar, not sure about pact familiars, but with a wizard's familiar, the telepathic communication comes around by default. But granted, it's not a cantrip. Oh, is it? Oh, hang on. Find familiar. I'm having another moment. Find familiar. No, it's not a cantrip. It's a 1st level spell. So maybe that's what they're doing. They're kind of making the familiars easier to summon, but limiting their power somewhat by locking the telepathy through a spell slot, basically, which I kind of like, because familiars. Anybody that's played in one of my games, in fact, some of our Adventurers Guild players, which, by the way, we do have our Adventurers Guild, which is some pay-to-play games on Start Playing Games. You can find me on there, Wayne Ingram, and we have some regular games running, but some of my regular players like familiars, and quite rightly too, because they're very handy for that exploration part of the game and exploring dungeons. But the ability for them to telepathically communicate is actually, I think, what makes the familiars so powerful, because you can just send them off into the dungeon and then get them to ping things back to you. So I like the fact that this has kind of been hidden behind some spell slots. Oh, my laptop is not plugged in, and it will die on me and cut off this stream if I don't plug it in quickly. So give me a sec. Yeah, so I kind of like the fact that that's been locked behind some spell slots, just because it limits it puts a limit on the familiar's power, because you can still do the remote viewing, which is also helpful. But of course, that's going to take an action and potentially your turn. So let's look at this pact familiar stat block. So they are tiny of the choice that you choose when casting the spell: aberration, celestial, dragon, fey, fiend, or undead. Have any alignment. Armor class 10 plus your spell casting ability modifier. Their hit points are 5 plus your warlock level. Familiar has a number of hit dice, d4s equal to your warlock level. So these are I'm liking this so far. Speed 40, fly speed of 40 at hover, strength 3 -4, dex 14 +2, con 12 +1, intelligence 10 0, wisdom 14 +2, and charisma 8 -1. Condition immunities, charmed and exhaustion. Senses, dark vision 120 feet, passive perception 12, languages, telepathy 120 feet, only between you and the familiar, which again is locked behind the cantrip upgrade. Interesting that it is in the stat block by default. That might cause confusion, I think, for some people. Challenge rating not applicable, and proficiency bonus equals your bonus. Eldritch Bond, you can add your proficiency bonus to any ability check or saving throw that the familiar makes. Actions. This is interesting. A familiar does have, or a pact familiar at least, can attack, which is new. But they won't attack by default unless you use your reaction to command it to attack. So melee spell attack modifier to hit, reach 5, 1 target. If it hits, it's 2 damage plus half of your warlock level rounded up. Of the type determined by the creature type. So aberrations do acid, celestial do radiant, dragons do fire, fey do psychic, fiends do poison, and undead do necrotic. And you can also use an action, or use your reaction to command it to attack instead. It can use its action. If it doesn't take the... This is a bit unclear. This needs tidying up a little bit, because actually what they're saying is... that this familiar will use the dodge action and use its move to avoid danger unless you use your reaction to command it to attack instead. But actually, this next one, invisibility, is not an attack action. Invisibility, the familiar has the invisible condition until the end of its next turn. This needs clarifying, because as it's written, there's no way for the pact familiar to actually use invisibility, because the rules explicitly state that it will use dodge and move unless you use your reaction to command it to attack instead. There's nothing that allows it within that kind of cycle to be able to use the invisibility action. So that definitely needs clarifying. But I think if they can clarify that sort of stuff, I think that looks pretty good. Let's see now. Let's see if we can speed this up, because we are quickly running out of time. So packed weapon, conjuration, cantrip, warlock. Casting time, action, range, self. Components, somatic only. So you can do this in silence, which is cool. Gestures only. Duration, 24 hours. Tracing arcane sigils in the air, you conjure a simple or martial melee weapon of your choice in your outstretched hand, or you create a bond with a magic weapon you touch. The weapon you conjure or touch must lack the heavy property, and the spell fails if you touch a magic item that is attuned to someone else. For the duration, the weapon grants you the following benefits. Can I just say, by the way, really freaking cool. The imagery in my mind is great. Eldritch Warrior, when you attack, the weapon grants you all of the following benefits. Okay, all right. Eldritch Warrior, when you attack with the weapon, you can use your spellcasting ability modifier for the attack and damage rolls instead of using strength or dex. Pretty cool. You have proficiency of the weapon. Makes sense. Returning weapon. If the weapon has the thrown property, the weapon returns to your hand immediately after hitting or missing the target. Fucking cool. The spell ends early if you cast the spell again or die. When it ends, a conjured weapon disappears, or your bond with a magic item stops. Can I say, this is so freaking cool. The idea of just like a warlock's like conjuring a weapon out of pure shadow, throwing it, and then as soon as it hits, that shadow kind of accumulates in their hand, and that's so cool. I love warlocks, they're bloody epic. So cantrip upgrade when you reach 5th level, because this is a cantrip too. Very cool. When you reach 5th level as a warlock, you gain the extra attack feature for the conjured or magic weapon only. With that feature, you can attack twice with a weapon instead of once when you make the attack. This is bloody cool. Love it. Love it. So now we're moving on to another wizard spell. So this is Scribe spell, a 1st level transmutation spell, ritual for the wizard. Casting time 2 hours per level of scribed spell. Range self, component, verbal, somatic, and material. You're going to need a quill, a book, and 50 gold pieces of fine inks per level of the scribe spell. This spell consumes the inks. Now, one thing I do want to say about this before we actually read how the spell works mechanically, I am loving the fact that all of the spellbook stuff that has been kind of lost in various parts of the player's handbook, which you really have to try and piece together, has been nicely codified into these different spells, which you can do as ritual casted spells, so it's not going to cost you a spell slot. It just makes so much sense. I think that is actually really bloody good game design on behalf of wizards there. So, channeling magic through quill and ink. You scribe an arcane spell in your spell book or a blank book worth at least 50 gold pieces. The scribe spell must be of a level for which you have spell slots, and the book must lack the spell. As you magically scribe the spell, you must copy it from another spell book or a spell scroll, or you must have it prepared. If you copy it from a spell scroll, the scroll is destroyed. If you have the spell prepared, the casting time and component costs are halved. When the scribing is complete, the spell becomes one of your known spells in the book, appearing on its own page if the book was out of pages. What? Appearing on its own page if the book was out of... Okay, so magically pages appear? I think that's what it's saying. The spell appears in a cipher that is understandable only to you or someone casting Identify or Scribe spell, and if the book was blank before the scribing, that book is now your spell book. Pretty cool, pretty simple. I think it's fairly self-explanatory in that it is, again, just kind of codifying how spells get written into spell books. Mechanically, it was kind of a little bit like vague and kind of this grey area in the current rules system. So again, I like that that's been nicely codified. I just want to say, by the way, as we're coming near the end, if you're not familiar with our channel, Bardic Quest, we actually produce an actual play show which comes out weekly. This is kind of our first foray into perhaps more Dungeons and Dragons news-based content, just to kind of create some extra content for you and keep you guys in the loop. Because I must admit, I was never one for reading Unearthed Arcana until this new playtest came out with what was dubbed 1D&D. So I think it's actually quite helpful when you've got somebody going through it for you, so you can just do the dishes and listen to somebody reading through it and kind of process it yourself. So that's pretty cool. And hopefully we'll have some of the other cast members of Bardic Quest on this show as well to give some other opinions rather than just me talking at you. But if you do like this sort of content, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well, and also check out our main show, which is Bardic Quest, which is our actual play. We have over 80 episodes now, so if you're one for binge watching an actual play, then it's all there, and we're having a lot of fun producing that, so do check that out. Anyway, back to the few remaining spells that we have left. So, Sorcerer's Burst, Evocation, Cantrip, Sorcerer, which the clue is kind of in the title there. So, casting time, action, range 120 feet, components, verbal and somatic, duration, instantaneous. You cast Sorcerous Energy at one creature or object within range. Make a range attack roll against the target. On a hit, the target takes 1d6 damage. If you roll a 6 on a d6 for this spell, you can roll another d6 and add it to the damage. Whenever you cast this spell, the maximum number of these d6s you can add to the spell's damage equals your spellcasting ability modifier. Okay, fairly straightforward. So just basically it's this opportunity for this damage to just kind of snowball a little bit out of control to a degree. You choose the damage type each time you cast this spell: acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, psychic, or thunder. Pretty cool. This is a cantrip. Yeah, okay, that's pretty cool. So it's kind of 1d6 standard, but you can actually, if you're lucky, it can actually get fairly good. In fact, if you were spellcasting ability modifier, so you're probably in the region of probably up to 3 or 4 extra d6s from early levels. So that's pretty cool. Cantrip upgrade. This spell's damage increases by 1d6 when you reach certain sorcerer levels. So at 5th level, it becomes 2d6, 11th level, 3d6, and 17th level, 4d6. Okay, pretty cool. I mean, that's nice. It's not particularly exciting, but it's a cantrip and it's cool, and it's kind of, again, kind of got that wild magic aspect to it, which I think they seem to be really leaning into with the new sorcerer designs. Just from looking at these spells, again, I've not yet looked at the sorcerer class as presented in here. So 2 more spells to go, and then we will wrap up this live stream. Sorceress Vitality, a 3rd level abjuration spell, sorcerer. Casting time, action, range, self, component, verbal, somatic, and duration is instantaneous. You draw on your innate magic to fill yourself with vitality. You regain a number of hit points equal to 2d6 plus your spellcasting ability modifier, and if you have any of the following conditions, they end on you: blinded, deafened, and poisoned. So this is a way for basically a sorcerer to spend some spell slots and heal themselves. Pretty cool. Self-healing for the sorcerer. Nice. When you cast this spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, the healing increases by 1d6 for each slot level above 3rd. Again, pretty cool. Not the most exciting spell in the world, but I like the idea that the sorcerer, again, it's this kind of wild magic thing, or this innate magic thing that they're really leaning into, which I'm quite liking, because it's quite flavorful. This idea that there is so much raw magical energy in a sorcerer's blood that they can actually heal themselves magically, which is normally an area for primal or divine magic. Well, not normally. What am I talking about? Talking nonsense now. Nonsense. But I mean, thematically speaking, you think of healing, you think more of clerics and paladins than you do necessarily a sorcerer. But of course, it is limited to only healing themselves. So finally, now this sounds pretty cool, just the name of it. This is the last spell on the list. Sorcery Incarnate. 5th level, transmutation spell, sorcerer. Sorcery Incarnate, what a cool name. Casting time, bonus action, range, self, component, verbal, somatic, duration, concentration, up to 1 minute. The magic within you blooms, transforming you into a glittering being of magical energy for the duration. You regain a 1d4 sorcery points. Till the spell ends, you also gain the following benefits. You can use up to 2 of your meta magic options on each spell you cast, provided you pay the sorcery point cost. You have advantage on the attack rolls of every spell you cast. So you basically just become a being of pure arcane energy. And again, this kind of leans into that narrative, that lore, that flavor of a sorcerer just being full of raw energy. And in this instance, it's just letting that energy just almost like what's the I've got an image in my head of a film or something where somebody's so full of energy. Oh no, I think it was Heroes. Yeah, Heroes, that classic show that was ruined by writer's strikes. So let's hope that Hollywood sort themselves out and get these writers a good deal, so that no wonderful shows such as Heroes are spoiled again. But yeah, there was a guy on Heroes who was just so full of, I think it was like atomic energy. I think it was Heroes. Yeah, and he just blew up, essentially. It's kind of like that, but less violent. Yeah, I kind of like that for flavor. It's really, really cool. So that's it. That's the new spells that are presented in this new Unearthed Arcana. I'm really liking the sound of them. I think they're really, really cool. I particularly like where, well, I like where they're going with the Warlock, the Sorcerer, and the Wizard with all of these spells. The Wizard, they're leaning into this idea of the creation, the study of magic, and the creation of new magical spells. They're really leaning into this idea of wild magic, and the Sorcerer being this just pure arcane energy roaming around, almost sorcery incarnate, to use the name of that last spell. That's really coming through loud and clear. And the Warlock is less in terms of a unified flavor, but it almost feels as though like the Warlock is now graduating to proper spellcaster, which we will come to when we get to the class, looking at the classes later, because actually the Warlock is fully graduating to spellcaster, but they're leaning into that properly, and again, that's coming through with the spells that they have presented. So I am looking to do more of these live streams, as I mentioned in the last episode of Arcana Unearthed. Hopefully there will be more Bardic Quest cast members with us, or with me, to kind of keep things interesting at the very least, but also to give a more player-centric opinion. So again, if you do like this sort of content, do subscribe and like to our channel, and leave comments and thoughts on what you think of some of these spells in the comments below. And let us know what you think. But yes, I'm really enjoying doing these. It's forcing me as well to sit down and actually read the Unearthed Arcana properly and really try and get a feel for what they're doing, which is great too. So yes, thank you very much, folks. Once again, as I did mention, we do have our Bardic Quest Adventurers Guild, which is some pay-to-play games for those who struggle to get a D&D group together, or those that live out in the middle of nowhere and there are no gaming stores that they can go to. We are offering online games. That's something that I am running. I'm DMing myself. So if you head on over to bardicquest.com/play, you will find a link there. I do need to update that page because we've actually got a new game launching, a one-shot. We're doing Secrets of So-Called Keep on the 29th of May. But you'll find a link there to our Start Playing Games page. So you can sign up there as well if you want to. But for the time being, thank you very much for those that have been watching and have made it this far. Again, you can find the Unearthed Arcana at dndbeyond.com in the sources section, or you can have a look at the rest of it if you want to, or of course, if you prefer to wait for me to talk you through it, then I'll be happy to do that as well. So thanks guys again for joining me this afternoon, and for those watching on replay, thank you, and we will catch you next time when we'll be looking at the new feats presented as part of this Unearthed Arcana. So thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.